All right, live from the storm capital, huh, guys?
Okay, great. Good
Storm
morning.
Central.
It's a very unique day for us to make sure that the show goes on today. All right, so we're just going to give it a couple minutes for everyone to join in, and then we'll get started.
Hope everybody's staying safe and dry, or relatively safe and dry.
Okay. Rob, by the way, I don't see the teller here, and I'm having an issue with my screen. So just give me a thumbs up when you believe we're ready to go, and I'll do our quick introductions for everyone.
Sure thing. Yeah, it looks like we're about 1 minute away, maybe from noon. So I think we're at 11:59. Maybe just another minute or so, and people will be joining whenever they have the chance to do so. And looks like it's 12 noon Eastern time now.
Okay, very good. All right, so good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our presentation today on how to effectively review a SOC report. My name is Ryan Barris. You may recall me from last year as the Director of Programming. That's currently, that seat is now taken by Dan Rosenberg, who's here with us. Just a moment. Apologies, I'm trying to sort my screen here. Okay, no. Well, first of all, welcome on a day where we are faced with some where we're dealing with some very trying circumstances. As ISACA members, we probably all understand better than anyone else that our personal risk appetite and our personal risk tolerance levels are being put to the test today. And obviously, our thoughts go out to those on the west coast of Florida right now that are taking the brunt of the storm at this very moment. But leave it to ISACASFL Florida to ensure that the show must go on, even during a hurricane. And in fact, in a true showing of true business continuity planning, you probably see Rob Valdez displayed twice here on your screen in case one of his connections goes out. I'm actually broadcasting from Mexico City today. So even if everyone else loses their internet and their electricity, I'll still be here for you. So if that's not geo redundancy, I don't know what is. Now, what's interesting is that BCP and DR are a very important part of SOC, which Rob will go into here in just a little bit. And so our presentation today is both highly relevant as well as timely. And maybe that explains our high numbers of participation today as well. Nonetheless, all joking aside, we do wish for everyone to remain vigilant today, stay safe. So please, if you need to leave, if you receive a tornado alert, for example, please take shelter. Don't worry about the session. This is being recorded. It will be available online. Safety first for everyone. Obviously, today's session is also good for 1 hour of CPE. Okay, so excuse me just a second, folks. I'll pull my presentation. All right, so a little bit about ISACA. Sorry, folks. I'm dealing a little bit with some presentation issues here. We have our BCP in place, but just the logistics don't seem to be working in our favor. All right, give me just a moment here.
If it's not one thing, it's another, right?
If it's not one thing, yeah, you're right. It is something else. Okay, all right. I think we are back on track now. Okay, so this is our agenda for today. We have an hour session planned. We will talk, we'll do the quick introduction right now, and then the presentation by Rob, and then Q&A and wrap up at the very end. I'm joined today by Nan Rosenberg, again, who is our current Director of Programming, new to the board. Welcome, Dan. And Rob Valdez, who many of you know is our previous ruling king and past president for ISACASFL Florida. And what many of you probably may not know is that he's also a great presenter. A little bit about ISACA and some of the initiatives that are currently underway. So ISACA in May 2022, a couple months ago, launched its first wave of digital trust resources. This is something that we actually that your board members, some of your board members actually went to Washington, D.C. About 10 days ago to talk to some of the lawmakers in D.C. about how to about this new framework that's being launched by ISACA to help create greater trust between professionals, people, processes, and technologies. The framework is set to be released next month, and so you will be seeing more about this. Very interesting. Please read up about it if you have not heard about digital trust yet. And again, it's scheduled to be released by next month. So ISACA by the numbers. If you're new to ISACA, we have 550,000 engaged professionals in 225 chapters throughout the world. The South Florida chapter is one of the larger ones, certainly in the US, which is why we were also invited to go up to DC to speak to some of the lawmakers. And we also represent some of the leading industry certifications, which I'll talk to in just a moment. Also, ISACA is very much involved in community events and giving back. In 2021, there were 2,115 volunteer activities completed throughout 44 countries globally. We actually have our Community Day coming up in just a few days on October 1st. This is a recurring event by the South Florida chapter to clean up the beach, which will take place in Dania Beach. It's a great way to participate, get to know some of your fellow board members. It's just a fun day in general. And in all honesty, generally after a hurricane, there is a lot more to clean up than under normal circumstances. So if you are interested in helping preserve our beaches and getting to know your fellow ISACA members, please join us October 1st. Another initiative that was launched by ISACA is the One in Tech Foundation. This was launched in 2020 and is basically dedicated to building a diverse and inclusive global community of digital trust professionals. It's in essence a way for anyone to participate in digital trust. It removes barriers to ensure that the digital trust professionals are accessible for everyone. On this screen, you'll see the display of some of the most renowned certifications that ISACA represents. The CISA, the CISM, the C-RISC are the most known ones. So if you are new to ISACA, look into these. These are great for enhancing your career and also often lead to higher salaries as well, if that is of interest. And
next week we have a CISA and CISA training. In fact, if you want to jump on the bandwagon.
Yep, exactly. We have that coming up. We'll at the end of the presentation here, we'll also show the upcoming events, and that is certainly one of them. So if you're looking to get that certification, certainly look at our calendar, register, and it's a great way to learn and prep. ISACA also offers credentials that affirm very specific industry knowledge. So here are a couple that talk about cybersecurity audit certification, IT risk fundamentals, and also COVID specific certificates. Won't spend too much time on this because I know we won't, if you're interested in getting additional accreditations. All right, so that brings us to our presenter, Rob Valdez. So again, many of you know him, most of you know him as our past president. Very well spoken. He's got almost 20 years of experience. He's going to talk about the SOC today, SOC 2. For those that don't know, aside from his expertise, he's also just a generally very nice guy, great guy to work with, and brings a wealth of knowledge to the table, and particularly for those of you that may be involved in third-party risk. And Rob is going to dive quite deep into this this afternoon. And for any questions, please post those. We'll answer those as many as we can before time is up. I believe, Rob, I think that's the final slide that I've got right now until we get to the end of the presentation. So with that, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Ryan. I'll go ahead and start sharing the presentation. And good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for joining us in the storm. I hope that everybody's staying safe and doing well. I actually have a question of kind of like the participation and the impact of how much the storm is affecting you. If you would drop into the chat, if you're viewing this from South Florida, you can say yes, or say viewing from South Florida, or you can put your city if that's something that you're comfortable doing. I'm interested to see how many of us are willing to join into a session like this during a hurricane. I'm sure glad that we're able to do it. So let's have this conversation about how to effectively review a SOC report, a topic near and dear to my heart, and let's see if we can help peel back some of the mystery just a little bit on something that occasionally gives people a little bit of challenge and trouble and curiosity. And it's interesting that this is actually a story that in many ways is a digital transformation story, right? Because something that's accelerated significantly over the past few years is business reliance, and in addition to individual reliance, but business reliance on cloud services, of course, on software as a service, and therefore on third parties, right? And actually right now, we've got companies estimating that 70% of the business apps that they're using today are based on software as a service. That's software hosted by some other party. So some other party has access to their critical systems, if not also critical data to some degree. And it's interesting how much this is becoming more and more a part of our reality as risk professionals. And then, of course, that sign or that trend is showing no signs of slowing down, right? We've got approximately 85%, or an estimate of 85% of business apps will be in software as a service or in third-party clouds by 2025. So pretty remarkable how that's happened. And we know that one of the reasons that happened is because the pandemic really kind of leapt forward this adoption of digital transformation, right? Everybody was at home trying to figure out how to work remote before they thought maybe it was impossible. And then suddenly they're doing it from one day to the next with all of the challenges, opportunities, hiccups that brought, for better or for worse. We've accelerated, raced sometimes a little too fast into digital transformation. In a survey of more than 1,200 respondents before the pandemic, 88% of businesses said they use cloud services in one form or another. And most respondents think that their organization will grow their usage in cloud services over the next 12 months. Well, little did they know that the pandemic was going to bump that up quite significantly. I saw some estimates that 99% of organizations are using cloud services in one form or another now. To me, that number sounds extremely high, but it's a number that's certainly floating out there. And if they're not doing it out of necessity for the pandemic, out of a desire to enable a remote workforce, or out of a desire to somehow start recruiting more effectively, now that so many people are insisting on having at least a hybrid model work environment, if not a remote first work environment, then they may be doing it strictly or sheerly out of competitive reasons. McKinsey says that companies that have adopted cloud platforms say they're able to bring new capabilities to market about 20 to 40% faster. So if you want to stay up to date with the competition, if you want to provide the type of services and offerings that your clients are expecting from others, then you're probably adopting cloud increasingly in your business, adopting software as a service increasingly in your business. and this is showing no sign of slowing down, right? While that's happening, while we're adopting all these cloud services, software as a service, adopting increased digital transformation and hybrid workforce, 66% of respondents to a survey said that security remains one of the biggest challenge in this movement to the cloud that we've been doing for the past decade and have accelerated recently. And 60% said that actually their number one biggest challenge was governance and compliance, right? So if you're a member of ISACA or at least are familiar with the association, you've probably had this on your radar for quite some time anyhow. So this is probably not surprising information to you. You say, yeah, that sounds about right. Governance, compliance, and probably from your perspective, risk is absolutely at the center of this conversation in the movement to the cloud. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how digital transformation is impacting risk and how we as professionals can respond to that effectively. I'm Rob Valdez. As Ryan said, a lot of my perspectives are coming from my practice or my instruction or my volunteer work. My practice, I'm the director of digital advisory at Dashkow Bolton. That's a South Florida CPA firm that offers full service audit, tax, and advisory. I'm leading up the advisory practice. At Florida Atlantic University, I'm an adjunct professor, and one of the courses that I teach is accounting information systems. So we talk about SOC reporting in that class. And as Ryan mentioned, I've previously served as the president of ISACASFL Florida. Before that, corporate relations. Before that, just a member who was really excited to be a part of this type of discussion. So if you're interested in serving ISACA, reach out to the leadership. They would love to have your participation, and I'd love to see it as well. So this is where my perspectives are coming from. A lot of that digital advisory type of work that I've been doing for the past decade includes cybersecurity and IT audit, which a very big offering from that is SOC reporting. So in this conversation, we'll talk about the types of SOC reports that are out there, some important information that's included in SOC reports, and what you can be on the lookout for if you're evaluating a SOC report, either as someone who's responsible for overseeing and supervising and measuring third-party risk, or as someone who's maybe even responsible for explaining how your company is managing risk as you're participating in discussions with third parties and partners, right? Maybe they want to understand your information security program better. You're speaking on behalf of your company as a part of that discussion. And so you'd like to better be able to walk through the SOC report and explain important aspects of it. I think this conversation will help you there as well. So let's first make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of SOC report, SOC. We're talking system and organization controls, an evaluation framework created by the AICPA, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Sometimes people hear the word SOC or SOX or SOC, and they kind of either confuse or conflate a couple different acronyms together, which interestingly enough are related acronyms, right? So we're talking about SOC reports like SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, SOC for cyber, et cetera. There, of course, is the other conversation about SOX, which is Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, which does include internal control over financial reporting as well as over IT general controls. So a totally related topic, and it's easy to see why these acronyms sometimes get mixed up. And then there's also the other conversation about SOCs, which are security operations centers, where cybersecurity teams work to monitor alerts and do incident response and manage reporting and these types of things. And since that is in the domain of cybersecurity, and those are some of the similar types of professionals, of course, it's easy to mix up that acronym as well. In this conversation, though, we're talking about system and organization controls. That is internal control established by an organization to manage risk over usually their custody of somebody else's data, right? You are a company, you're giving your data to ADP, you're giving your data to Azure, you're giving your data to GCP or Google Cloud Compute, and you want to know that they're keeping your data safe. They provide you this report on their system and their organizational controls, which tells you how you can have more confidence in their system. So let's talk about a couple of the types of SOC reports that are common out there. The most common type of SOC reports are the SOC 1 and the SOC 2. And whether we're talking about a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, these are vehicles, these are reports that are produced where some independent auditor can give an opinion about the design and the implementation, and usually also the effectiveness of internal control. We'll talk about type 1 and type 2 when the effectiveness may or may not be included. But usually they're giving an opinion at least over the design and implementation, and then most often also the effectiveness. So let's distinguish between SOC 1 and SOC 2. SOC 1, control over financial reporting, right? If they give you a report, if you use ADP for payroll and then they give you a report, is it complete, timely, and accurate in terms of the financial information that's included in that report? That is most often a report that's requested by financial statement auditors when they're auditing an entity and that entity uses some other organization for important financial information. And so that's the SOC 1 report, and it includes all those internal control activities over financial reporting types of activities. That is a very important type of report that's related to our profession. However, SOC 2 is far more relevant to many ISACA members, because SOC 2 reports on internal control over information security, and that's generally requested by third-party risk management professionals, and most of us fall into that category. Either we're working in internal audit or in third-party risk management or some other form of governance, risk, and compliance role at our organization. And so what we want to know at our organization, then when we're using third parties and vendors and suppliers, and we're giving them our sensitive information, we want to know that they're taking care of it and they have internal control in ways that are relevant to us and meet our requirements. And that allows us to establish those relationships and maintain confidence in those relationships as part of our vendor due diligence, as part of our ongoing risk management for our environment. So we're going to focus this conversation more on the SOC 2. Let's also comment on what a SOC 3 is, because you'll hear that term as well in these types of conversations. SOC 3, if you have to say it in a sentence, it's SOC 2 light, right? SOC 3 is a SOC 2 report that has been changed so that it's available for public consumption. It is not under restricted use, right? So SOC 1 and SOC 2 both have restricted use. If you look at the opinion paragraphs in these types of reports, you'll see this paragraph at the end that says this is only to be provided to these other types of parties, and it lists some very specific parties that have understanding of internal control and that have a business interest and these kinds of things. SOC 3 is fit for public consumption. You can actually put it on your website. Anybody can read it if you so choose. And so that's something that includes the same information that a SOC 2 report does, but it's been condensed and far less robust in terms of the information that's included. Because if you're providing a report for public consumption, you certainly don't want to spill all your secrets. And, you know, we're kind of doing this on a least privilege necessary basis reporting, right? So the SOC 3 is far less detailed and far less risky to share than a SOC 2 report is. So since SOC 3 is fit for public consumption, we'll actually look at a SOC 3 in this conversation as well to guide some of the type of information, because it's the same information that's in a SOC 2, but condensed in a friendlier form. So I also mentioned that SOC reports, both the SOC 1 and the SOC 2, can come in a couple of different types. They can come in type 1 and type 2. So that means if you take the SOC 1 and SOC 2, and then type 1 and type 2 for each, you have, at least for those two different reports, you have 4 different variations of how this can occur. So in the upper left-hand corner, SOC 1, type 1 is internal controls over financial reporting and making sure that they were designed and implemented as of a single point in time. So you point at a single date in the calendar, like September 30th or December 31st, and you say, okay, these controls over financial reporting were designed and implemented on that specific day, not a period of time, just on that one day. You can point to it and you can say, okay, they were implemented. That makes it very flexible, very much less level of effort and burden to move if you have to move that date around. And if for some reason the organization needs more time preparing for that type of reporting. Let's go down to the block right below that, SOC 1 Type 2. That's internal controls over financial reporting, that they are designed and implemented as well as effective over a period of time. And oftentimes this period of time is 12 months. And because the auditor's testing a period of time, they're making samples in those 12 months. They're covering that entire period. Let's say it's from January to December. They're testing at some points in time, depending on the control and depending on the frequency of it. They're testing in different months. They're testing different instances of things occurring. And they're also reporting on that effectiveness, as opposed to just something being designed and implemented on a single date. They're testing that effectiveness over that entire period of time. As a result of them testing that effectiveness, you get more information. You get information about their tests, the results of their tests, in a SOC 1 Type 2. But like we said, our conversation is more focused on this right-hand column, which is the SOC 2. So also it comes in the Type 1 variation, that internal controls over information security were designed and implemented as of a specific date. And that's usually how organizations start out their reporting cycle. The first time they ever do a SOC 2, they oftentimes start with a Type 1 because it's easier to say, okay, we'll get everything in place by this date and we'll go ahead and get the audit. We don't have to wait 12 months for a period of time after we've already implemented our controls before somebody can report on it, or at least wait 3 months or 6 months or something like that. And so it enables them to get something into their users' hands, into third parties' hands, and into the marketplace faster, which is why they oftentimes start off with that Type 1. It's also a lower level of effort for them to produce all that evidence that the auditor needs to see. But in the lower right-hand corner, the SOC 2 Type 2, internal control over information security, being designed and implemented and effective over a period of time. Obviously, that's a higher level of reporting, a higher level of evaluation, a higher level of assurance that is more useful to the marketplace, more useful to third parties in terms of it being over a period of time. So that's going to be the most common version that ISACA members will encounter and will want to understand. So we're focused on the SOC 2 Type 2 in our conversation. And it's important to remember that the SOC 2 framework is an evaluation framework. It's not a prescriptive framework that says you need to do A, B, and C, and D, like a lot of internal control frameworks do. Instead, it says an auditor needs to test against these types of objectives. We test that this is happening, that is happening, that you have objectives, that you have control over your control environment, that you have control over information and communication, you have control over risk management, over logical access, over physical access. So it doesn't tell you specifically what you need to do, although it does tell you what you need to somehow have accomplished. And for that reason, the SOC 2 evaluation framework maps against basically any type of robust information security prescriptive framework that might be out there in the marketplace, whether it's something that's explicit or implicit. If there's a NIST internal control framework, like for example, NIST 853, or if you're a financial institution and you're reporting against requirements from the IT control booklets from the FFIEC, or if you're a healthcare or health tech organization or health tech app or health tech partner that is also required to comply with HIPAA compliance, then your controls will map against the SOC evaluation framework. If you're a broker dealer, your controls will map against the SOC evaluation framework, or you're providing technology services to broker dealers, or you're a publicly traded company or providing services to publicly traded companies, then the SOC evaluation framework or SOC 2 framework is capable of mapping against any of these because it's just an abstract framework of requirements, not control activities. There are, of course, principles and points of interest that can tend to elicit certain types of activities. Hey, it's probably a good idea if you're performing vulnerability scanning. It's probably a good idea if you're performing penetration testing. However, those are not explicitly mentioned as requirements. What is interesting is that as the marketplace becomes more mature, then the sort of standard expectation of maturity of what is done also kind of tends to rise, such that if an organization is not performing some of these types of activities, even though it might not be explicitly listed as something that's expected by the framework, your auditor still might bring it up and still might comment on it as a deficiency, perhaps even in your report, if you're not doing those types of things, because it can be such that not doing those things is now perceived as almost negligence in your part if you're not meeting those types of requirements, right? So even though it may not be explicitly listed as a control objective, it may still lead to impact in reportings in these SOC reports. So let's talk a little bit about what's included in that SOC 2 evaluation framework. On your left-hand side, you see 9 categories of control objectives that are addressed in the framework, no matter how robust you're building out your SOC report. So it includes at least control environment, right? You're hiring of people, you're training of people, you're evaluating of people, your code of ethics, these kinds of things. Information and communication, how your organization gathers information from the different teams, how it communicates to users, how it trains its own personnel, how it communicates to other types of third parties about material events, how it measures its progress and strategic objectives, these kinds of things. It always includes risk assessment, how you're identifying new risks and changes in risk, and how you're measuring the likelihood and impact of negative events and consequences. These things are included in the framework. Monitoring. How do you monitor and oversee and supervise your internal control? Do you have an internal audit department? Do you have people who function that way equivalently? Do you have management just walking around the office inspecting stuff, whether it's formalized or informal? There's some kind of monitoring activity going on at your organization. That's always included. All these on the left, always included. Your control activities, right? The actual procedures that people do to give some level of assurance about the mitigation of risk in your organization, how you end up explicitly stating those, informing those, oftentimes through policies and procedures, is included as a component of the framework. And then you get into the stuff that feels more like specific control activities related to information security, like logical and physical access, passwords, firewalls, different types of role-based access, system operations. That's the vulnerability scans, the incident response, the different types of evaluation and root cause analysis that you're performing. Change management. How do you introduce and retire different assets from your organization, whether it's physical assets, logical assets, data, software that you're developing? How do you keep control of those types of things as things are changing in your organization? And risk management. How do you deal with your own third parties, right? Because there's always a chain of supply from one organization to the next. So how are you dealing with your third parties, which we're also interested in if you are our service provider? How do you deal with insurance? These other types of things are included in risk mitigation. So all that is included if you're reporting on information security at your organization. And in a SOC 2, you must report on at least security, which conceptually links back to that confidentiality, integrity, and availability baseline of the CIA triad. In addition to security, you can also perform additional types of activities and report on additional types of activities that your organization is performing to provide additional assurance over the availability of your systems, the processing integrity of your systems and data, the confidentiality that you have in place at your organization, and the privacy, right? So if you're providing some highly available service or app, maybe it would make sense to not only perform on the availability that's already included in security, but also some additional availability considerations like different types of environmental controls at your data center, and or your business continuity planning and how often you're testing that and to what degree, and your disaster recovery planning, how often you're taking things down and bringing them back up and going through those types of testing and doing root cause analysis for any types of changes. That may be included in availability, additional reporting added on top of security. Processing integrity, if you're bringing through a lot of complex data and performing procedures on it through your system and performing transformations and manipulations on that data, and then providing some type of meaningful reporting, maybe the organization or your your customers want to know if you're providing good integrity, and maybe you, the user organization of this system, you want to know that the information's, the inputs and the outputs have a reasonable control over the transformations in between. Confidentiality, if you have confidentiality agreements in place, and you want to make sure that there are a number of procedures in place for defending those agreements, then that becomes relevant. Privacy, if you're interested in the control over individual data subjects, right? Identifiable individuals that you can point at and say, this is a person, this is a human. How are you controlling the specific data related to that person, that human, that personally identifiable information? And or you have requirements under the state of California or other states or European requirements under GDPR that relate to privacy, then maybe the organization will choose to add on these types of things. But no matter what, they always have to report on information security. A SOC 2 will address information security in it. What are some of the components of the SOC 2 report that you're going to see? Probably in this order. Sometimes these things change around just a tiny bit, but probably in this order. You're going to see the auditor's report, which includes that auditor's opinion on the actual internal control. You're going to see management's assertion. That's the company that's getting audited. They're saying, hey, we gave the auditor all this information. We set up these internal control systems. We implemented them, and we're giving the auditor assurance that we did so. And that's really what the auditor is actually auditing against, right? That management is indeed performing the things it claims to do. Then there's a description of the entire system of internal control, which includes all those components that I was just talking about, and includes control activities under each of those components. Then in a type 2 report, you'll see the auditor's tests and the results of those tests. You'll see specifically how they tested the control activities. You'll see the results, whether there were some kinds of exceptions or deviations, or whether there were no exceptions noted. You'll see that in the report. And then there could be other information as well. Maybe if there was an exception, management chooses to respond to that exception and say, we do agree that this happened. However, we've resolved it in this way. Or maybe the auditor is providing some additional information. In addition to the control activities that we tested, we also tested these other things, or we observed these other things, or we noted this other information. The auditor can provide something in an additional session. So
Rob, there was a question. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I want to pause for a second. The question that came in, and I hope I'm understanding the question correctly, but the person wanted to know, what is the what does the SOC 2 Type 1 cover? Meaning from an adequacy of controls. Is there a distinction between the SOC 2 Type 2 and the SOC 2 Type 1 from an adequacy of controls standpoint, or is that the same?
Got it. Nice. Very good question, actually. So in terms of the scope of control activities that are included in the Type 1 and the Type 2, the scope of the activities can actually be the same, right? If they both choose to just report on that security criteria, then a Type 1 would have the same control activities that a Type 2. So in terms of sufficiency of the scope, that's same in that regard. However, as we said, the Type 1 SOC 2 is just as of the moment in time that the controls are designed and implemented on one specific date. The Type 2 covers a period of time, right? And so because of that, many organizations insist on an ongoing basis receiving the Type 2 report so that they can know that throughout the entire period of time, not only did you have those controls designed and implemented, but you also operated them effectively. The Type 1 is very useful because when an organization is brand new, or when an organization has a very large systematic change, you can just point at a date and say, hey, here's the systems as they are at this moment in time, and at least we're reporting on that to you. But from that point on, generally speaking, the marketplace expects a Type 2. So the marketplace would usually think that the Type 2 would be the necessary and sufficient version of reporting after the initial report has been produced. Great question. Scrolling through real quick. Yeah, okay, awesome. All right, so it looks like we may have addressed that question, but love the questions. Keep them coming. Let's take a real quick peek at a general use, publicly available SOC 3, right? Google produces a SOC 3. This would be the light or condensed or smaller version of their SOC 2. So here we go. This is their SOC 3 over Google Workspace. And you can see that they're reporting over security, availability, and confidentiality, and privacy as well, right? So a lot of stuff. They're not reporting over processing integrity in this one. And there's, probably good reasons why that I can think of, but I won't venture to guess too much. So let's use this as an example. Here's the opinion from that SOC 3 report. And let's take a quick second to talk about some opinions. You can see in this statement that at the top, in the opinion of Ernst & Young, the audit firm, Google's controls over the system were effective throughout the period of May 1st through 21 through April 30th of 22 to provide the reasonable assurance that we're looking for, right? So this would be an unqualified opinion because they didn't say, except for this part, or except for that part, or except for this time, or except for this area, except for this thing that happened, everything else is effective. So that's unqualified. If they did say except for, and then they listed something and then later went on to describe it, that would be a qualified opinion, right? They're giving some kind of qualification. Except for this, everything else was fine. So there can be an unqualified opinion, which is what people want. That's the clean opinion, or the qualified opinion's been modified to say except for something. There can also be an adverse opinion. If there's so many except fors that it's pervasive and material and you probably shouldn't be relying on the things that management is claiming, then the auditor can give an adverse opinion and say, this system basically is not reliable for providing reasonable assurance for these purposes. Or the auditor can disclaim an opinion. If management doesn't give them the assertion or doesn't give them information or won't provide enough access to be audited, then the auditor might disclaim, say, hey, we can't provide an opinion on that, and that would be put in that opinion paragraph.
Rob, here's a
So
question
that-
for you. So is any audit firm allowed to issue such an opinion, or how do you know if an auditing firm is accredited to provide such an opinion?
Yeah, great question. So this is an AICPA framework. And in order to issue an audit under an AICPA framework, you should be an AICPA member firm. You should participate in AICPA quality control requirements, right? That's what would be required to issue reports under this, technically copyrighted standard that is produced and published by the AICPA. The truth is that we see some organizations not AICPA members not participating in peer review, not having a quality control program that sometimes issue these reports. They typically look a little wonky. They look a little unusual. They don't have things in the right place. They don't have the opinion phrased right. I've seen 2 or 3 in 10 years, right? So it's not a lot, but they're out there. And if you look at this post of a CISO on LinkedIn, he says, I think SOC 2 framework is great. Then he goes on into the second paragraph and he says, I've seen a lot of auditors not doing the work. One company I saw didn't even have a basic policy. In some cases, the SOC auditor gave a template for missing policies and said it was good enough. Nobody was trained on the template. Nobody actually filled them out. They're saying that people actually didn't do the spirit. They just kind of like threw something at it and then just check, gave them the report, right? And this is something that's interesting that can happen either because a consultant is producing this report that's not, an audit, an AICPA member, not part of a peer review quality control program, or because there's a firm that just is going off the rails and not doing what they're supposed to do. This can happen. There's also something very interesting happening in this space right now. And there are there's a lot of disruption from compliance automation applications, right? Cloud software that helps you report on SOC 2 compliance. And there's some big names out there, Vanta, Drata, Tugboat, these kinds of organizations that are producing these cloud apps. And as a result of that, all different types of non-traditional service providers or auditors are coming in and saying that they're able to do this. But you can check to see that the firm issuing the report issuing that letter, the one that signs the audit opinion, has a good reputation. You should be able to Google them. They should have, you know, a lot. I mean, CPA firms are trying to get business. They should have a lot of information available to you. You should see a lot of their staff on LinkedIn. You should see them publishing maybe perhaps on their website, or alternatively their peer review. A lot of times they want to get that peer review letter out there. They'll make it publicly available. Their personnel should have certifications, you know, like you see the people in ISACA have lots of cert credentials behind their names. You're going to see that sort of thing from the auditor. If you don't see those types of things, you may want to ask this third party, hey, you know, tell me a little bit more about your auditor. I kind of want to understand. And then if it turns out that maybe a lot of them are not appearing to be as credentialed as you would expect to be involved in this type of report, that's something to definitely be aware of. So great question, Ryan. Let's talk a little bit about dates in these audit reports, something else that you want to pay a lot of attention to. We already said that a type 1 is as of a specific date. A type 2 covers a period of time. So if we look over on the right-hand side, you can see that this SOC 3 report and the bottom sentence says for the period of May 1st, 21 to April 30th, 22. So by default, you know that this is covering a period of time, which means this SOC 3 was derived from the work to do a SOC 2. So this is that design, implementation, and effectiveness testing over that period of time, more reliable and generally what's expected from the marketplace. Now, April 30th was a little while ago, right? If today is near the end of September, so something that the organization may also produce is a bridge letter, which is a letter that says, and this would be not from the auditor, but from the organization itself, like from Google in this instance. And it would say, since, you know, April 30th, we have kept these controls in place. They're effectively providing you an extension on their assertion. They're saying we're still doing this stuff. And by the way, you know, we're undergoing our routine audit, which is the next one's going to be published in 6 months or a year, whatever their cycle is. So you should be able to obtain a bridge letter, an assurance from management, which is not as high of an assurance as from that third-party auditor, but nonetheless something that is useful and is oftentimes expected. How about the scope of what's included in that audit? Do you need to be sure that you understand that scope fairly well as you're reviewing that for third-party risk? Make sure you're looking at the right entity, right? Is this the same legal entity that you actually have a contract with? Is it somebody else? Is it just their data center? Sometimes you ask a SaaS provider for their SOC report, you know, and I have an agreement with ABC, you know, ABC is Health Record Processing Inc. And then they turn around and they give me a SOC report for Azure, you know, Microsoft Azure's third-party data center. Well, that's great because maybe they're using that data center, but I'm actually, in addition to that, I'm also interested in that organization's controls, because we said, you know, control environment, risk assessment, and information and communication, they're monitoring. Azure's not doing any of that for the organization, right? So they need to be doing that for themselves. And ideally, if we're providing them critical data, then they would be, and we would have assurance over that. We also need to make sure it's covering the right products, right? You know, on the right-hand side, you can see that Google produces reporting for Google Workspace, Google Cloud, Google AppSheet, Google Apogee, all these different products. Well, I wouldn't want to accidentally review a report over some product that's a totally different product than the one that I'm reviewing, or the one that I'm looking for assurance on. Or how about their location? Sometimes they produce them. You can see here region. This is from Google's Compliance Center. Maybe they got a report over APAC area, a report over Europe, a report over the Americas, or different business units. Got to make sure that the scope aligns to that which is of your interest, that with which you have your contract. And then you can be interested in their subservice organizations, right? Because they're going to list those types of things in their SOC report. Maybe their data centers, maybe some kind of outsourced security operations center SOC that they use, right? And you can go through, and all that's going to be in the description that the organization provides, that description component of the report, and they'll tell you about the nature and the extent of their reliance and the types of controls that they expect that organization to be providing. And those are called complementary subservice organization controls. You know, our ABC Health Tech Inc., we produce this electronic healthcare records app, and we use Azure, and we expect Azure to have cooling systems and security guards and all kinds of stuff in place. And they're going to list those things out for you, and you can determine whether that seems reasonable to you. The organization, that third party, will also report to you about user controls, right? The kinds of things that they expect you, the user organization, to be doing, right? So complementary user entity controls and user control considerations are two different varieties that might show up in the report. Complementary user entity controls are them literally saying that our system of internal control is not assured unless you do these things. In other words, the auditor's opinion that provides assurance, hopefully in an unqualified manner, actually isn't complete unless you also do this, right? Like you also, we ship you a piece of software that you put, you attach to your switch, you hold in your office. And if you just let whoever walk up to that piece of software and plug, hardware, and plug whatever USB they want into it, well, guess what? None of our internal control will work after that, because you will have violated all the control that we established and created a vulnerability that takes it down. Then there's also user control considerations. They're not saying they're not saying that their system of control won't work. They're just saying these, generally speaking, are things that would be expected of our users. It's the best baseline of best practices that they're recommending that you take note of. It's kind of a disclaimer. It's a little bit of a cover yourself for liability, that they're putting the user on notice. Hey, you got to at least keep your passwords secret, because if you don't keep your passwords secret, then somebody else is going to get access under your credentials, and then there's nothing we can do about that.
Rob, when you're ready, there's a number of questions when you're ready.
Sure. Yeah. Let me see if I can zip through some of this stuff, and then I'll hop into those questions. So I'll be fast on this stuff. Changes to the system are also described. That can include people, processes, and technology, like key personnel. I one time saw an adverse opinion produced because a third-party administrator actually did change over their ERP system, and they have really ineffective change management in place. And as a result of that, a lot of the records were corrupted. And so an adverse opinion was produced because they didn't effectively manage that change in technology. So you would want to look at those changes to the system, and you want to look at this more to the extent that this vendor is more and more critical to your organization. And then in the testing and results section, usually towards the end of the report, there's this huge table, lists all the controls, each control, the type of test that the auditor performed, and the results of those tests. And you can see deviations or exceptions. Those words are used interchangeably depending on the type of report or the auditor that's publishing it. And that means an instance where the control was designed to have one type of result, something else occurred that was material that you should take notice in. And the auditor is going to perform one of 4 different types of tests: inquiry, inspection, observation, and reperformance. Inquiry alone is never sufficient, so they have to combine inquiry with at least one of the other 3 types of tests. And generally speaking, reperformance would be the highest level, but inspection and observation are sufficient. And they probably should use those words in their description of tests, or at least something that is reasonably inferable back to those words. Because if they didn't perform one of those 4 types of things, or at least one of those bottom 3, then technically their testing is not even sufficient. And that's a way that you can better understand what the auditor is doing. Then there's the other information section, where I say management can explain exceptions, or the auditor can provide other information. Won't spend too much time on that as we kind of wrap up and think about some of the stuff that's happening in the future. And that is, 1 of 3 employees at a Fortune 1000 company is regularly using a cloud-based SaaS that isn't approved by the IT department, right? So shadow IT, 33% of employees are using shadow IT at Fortune 1000. I hope it's not that way at your organization, but certainly our role in doing this type of thing is increasing in importance. So understanding these concepts is becoming more important. And not only are more people doing it, they're doing it faster. It used to take a decade ago 57 hours to implement a new app. Now it takes about 7 on average. And the amount of value that our organization is concentrating in this use of third-party apps, third-party public cloud, third-party service provider, SaaSes, is expected to increase by 241% over the next couple of years, which is second only to the increase in public cloud. So SaaS spending is ballooning enormously. We saw that, of course, in the pandemic, not showing signs of going the other direction. So this is going to be more and more important for us to become better and better at understanding these types of things. So let's take a look at some of these questions that we have and see if we can get some good responses to them. So how valuable is a generic type 2 from Azure or AWS versus one that reviews specific Azure or AWS environments an entity uses, which is often impossible to get? Yeah, okay. So I was kind of given that example where, you know, I have an agreement with ABC Health Tech Inc. or say whoever you want, ABC Security Inc. or ABC Accounting Inc. or whatever it is. And instead of me getting their report that says their name on it, they give me Azure, right? Which means that I'm getting basically assurance over Microsoft's environment, but not insurance over the actual party that I have a relationship with. Well, it's better than nothing, right? But it's not specific to the scope that I'm interested in. So if I'm requesting SOC reports from vendors, chances are they have some access to sensitive and or critical data or systems that I'm interested in. So chances are it's probably not sufficient for my concerns. And then what do you do when you have deviations or exceptions? Next steps, right? So if you're going through the testing and the results of testing and you see some deviations or exceptions, what you should really ask is how this impacts your organization. To what degree is this material? So the most common deviation and exception that I see at organizations is typically that they don't decommission access rights after somebody's terminated, right? Somebody got terminated and it took 2 weeks or 2 months to get their badge turned off or to get their credentials removed from the system. And then if you read in the other information provided by management section, a lot of times management will say, yes, we agree that the auditor found this and we agree that it's a problem which we resolve in the following ways. However, we would like to note that even though this access card was still on, then, you know, people technically, those terminated employees technically couldn't access your information for the following reason. Even though their badge was still on, their credentials were off, or they were removed from Active Directory, even though they weren't moved from the application itself, or something that's a little more specific to scope. So even just because you see a deviation or exception, it's not a silver bullet. And then even if it isn't something that management sufficiently mitigated, there still may be other considerations, right? Maybe you see that the environmental monitoring system in their data center wasn't effective for 6 months of the past year. Well, that's very concerning, and you'd like to know that they're doing a better job of it now, but that may not be something that materially you are concerned about today. There's some questions in the Q&A that I can hop into as well, unless Dan or Ryan wanted to get going here.
No, that's what I wanted to point out. And also, as you're looking at those questions, one other question that might be important for our audience is the SOC considered a international standard or is it more US oriented?
Fantastic question. Because the SOC is a framework published by the AICPA, it has been adopted very popularly in the United States. There is an international auditing standard that can be used to map to the SOC framework, which is related to the SOC 2 framework, but it's published in our international auditing standard instead. And then, of course, ISO 27000 is popular for evaluating information security management systems, and it's a little more prescriptive in nature internationally. So it's most popular in the US. Who would you typically interface with during the certification process with an early stage startup? Who are the stakeholders on the vendor side? Yeah, wonderful question. So very, very often there's a good amount of communication with either DevOps and or head of engineering and or founder / CEO / manager. Well, and when you say early stage startup, we're talking right 3 to 23 employees, 3 to 30 employees, something like that, right? So when we're getting access to the founder at an early stage startup, they do have to give us some information, and then from that point on, it usually can be handle without consuming quite so much of the founder's time, which is obviously ideal for a lot of different reasons from the side of the auditee, right? But DevOps, heavy role, engineering, if we're talking about SaaS, right? Engineering is going to be involved. Somebody's got to give information over HR, the hiring and firing of employees. So whether you call that an ops or director of ops, or whether you just have somebody who's kind of filling in to do that, those people are involved. If you do have a compliance at an early stage startup, because that's the nature of your business, then yeah, that person would definitely be involved as well. The rest of the engineering team, you don't need to bring them in. Sales, you probably don't need them involved. Maybe customer success, don't necessarily need them involved. Maybe they'll provide one or two things. That's it. How much of the certification can be implemented using audit automation tools? Yeah, this is such an interesting discussion. Can it all be automated? There's so many tools right now offering automation. Yeah. So the short answer is no, it cannot all be automated. You saw a bunch of stuff asking about how the organization communicates, about how the organization evaluates risk, about how they establish culture, how they establish tone at the top. You can't really automate that human layer. And to be honest, you wouldn't really want to, because you need to know that the people who are responsible for running these systems do indeed have an interest and a stake and a procedure for running them effectively. So even though I am actually a fan of these automation platforms, and I do have Desco Bolton is partner with multiple of these platforms, it can't all be audited, and there will not be a day when the entire SOC 2 it can't all be automated, and there will not be a day when the entire thing is automated. What does the future look like for SOC review automation? Yeah, increasing for sure. These platforms that are offering this, the reason they're growing so fast is because the service is valuable. They definitely have something there. The extent to which the auditor understands that automation, works within that automation platform, the extent to which the platform is actually doing the things that it claims can vary in the marketplace, but definitely increasing. And I know we're at the end of time, guys, so maybe I'll hand it back to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. That was, I think, a very informative presentation for everyone involved. I think we captured, if not all, certainly most of the questions. So if there's any additional follow-up questions from anyone that's participating today, please send them over and we will answer those to the best of our ability. Rob, I'd like to thank you sincerely for the presentation today, for your time. And also Dan for putting this together, and unfortunately Mehmet, who is our new president, who could not join us today, but sends his regards. He'll be here certainly next time. Also, what you're seeing right now are our upcoming events scheduled for September and October. As I mentioned before, the Community Day is the very next event coming up in a couple of days, so please help us clean up the beaches post the hurricane. We can use your help, and it's just great fun, great way to get to know each other, Rob, Dan, and all the other board members. And then someone asked about the CISA training. There was a link posted. Dan posted the link in terms of how you can register for the upcoming CISA training. Again, you'll find it in the chat, or if you have any other questions, please just get in touch with us. So with that, we're right on time. Again, you will receive 1 hour of CPE for attending today's session. Thank you, everyone, and please stay safe. Have a good afternoon.
Everybody.
Bye, everyone.